Before this episode begins, over the next couple of months, I am looking specifically for parents, educators, and librarians whose lives or whose children's lives have been personally impacted by book bans. If you have a story you are willing to share publicly and to appear on camera using a first-name basis, please reach out to bookfairpod@gmail.com, subject line Banned Books Week. Welcome to the Book Fair Podcast. My name is Anthony, and this show is all about children's literature and the freedom to read. This week, we have an interview with Sandra Magsamen, author of over 60 interactive board books for young readers. Next week, we will have another episode covering new book releases, as well as another interview on Friday. Make sure to follow the podcast wherever you are currently listening to stay up to date on the latest news in children's literature. Now, let's begin with this week's interview. Hello, Sandra. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. It's so great to be with you again.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time today. And again, it's also great to be speaking with you again. I think that the conversation that we had last time was one of my favorites that we've had on this podcast. And for people who maybe haven't heard that one, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. I'm Sandra Magsamen. I have been writing books for more than 25 years for little ones, both board books that are straight up board books, novelty board books, and also picture books. My training is as an artist and as an art therapist. So I bring that combination together as well as a mom, into the words of poetry that I write and the imagery that I create for children and families in everything that I do.
And you used a word there that a lot of people may hear and have sort of a negative connotation to it. You said that you write novelty board books. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by novelty and maybe dispel some of the misconceptions people might have with the term?
Sure. Well, as most people know, a board book is made from harder paper, stiffer paper, so that our little ones can really turn those pages in a way that allow them to engage and interact and not tear the book. It's chunky and thick and just wonderful, I think. A novelty board book, which is really a term, I guess, that's used in the publishing industry, takes that same base material of paper that's hard, but we add things to it to make the book even more interactive. So you can really replace the word novelty with the word interactive. So things like lift the flap, things like mirrors in the back of a book. In my case, I go a little bit overboard. And if you see behind me, things like ears and tails and even legs that come out of the top of the book. Things like glitter or shiny ink on the top of a page. Those are all additions that help a child even engage a little bit more within that page. They have to open the flap. They can touch something soft. They can hold a little blanket. So those things I'm really interested in creating for children so that their senses are being engaged and informed and expanded when they're reading with their parent or grandparent or teacher or siblings. So I'm a big fan of the integration of all those components into books.
You mentioned the phrase going overboard. Do you find yourself kind of struggling to pick something to stick with? Do you find yourself battling between maybe one novelty or another?
I don't. And the reason why not is because the way I design and the way I invent novelties, they are enmeshed with the content, with the story that I want to tell. So like I Whaley Love You is a book that just came out this summer. And I knew I wanted a whale's tail coming out of the top of the book the whole way through because I wanted that splashing and engaging and movement all the way through. So the kinds of enhancements and the kinds of extra, kind of novelty, engaging pieces are always organic to tell the story. The book behind me here, Your Extraordinary, is about an egg that finds itself understanding that it is extra special, it's extraordinary. It's all those egg puns. And I wanted something to identify the chick to be coming out the top with this wonderful, fluffy, even iridescent fabric that comes out of the top of the book. So they all are designed to really enhance the story. I Love You, Honey Bunny. The bunny ears are satin on the front, and there's a stuffed animal plushy material on the back. So as that child is being read, I love you, honey bunny, they're rubbing their little fingers as they get ready to go to sleep on that soft satin. So I'm really looking at the best way to communicate that message and give that child that visceral, three-dimensional feel engagement as they're reading. So that's, they're organic to the story. So no, it's fun trying to figure out the right modality, the right piece, the right extra, if you will, to really have that story sing.
You mentioned the whale tale. You also mentioned the egg puns. A lot of times integrating humor and simple things like that younger children that are, maybe 2 to 3 when they start to mimic speech and are learning to put sentences together, that they're able to latch onto sort of the humor of things. But I think that what's more interesting is the book that recently came out, Hello Baby, which is the one that was sent to me for this interview, which is really meant for newborn infants. Can you talk a little bit about Hello Baby and the way that you write, not just for the children, but for the adults in their lives?
Absolutely. This book is so meaningful to me. I have our first granddaughter is on the way. So as, this book was really coming to press and all of that, I'm like living in this space of, welcoming a little one, new baby to our family. So, we spent a lot of time with, what do we call this baby? What are the names? And so we've been playing around with, is it little peanut? Is it, Lovey? Is it baby girl? What is it? We don't know what it is. So this poem really came out of how do we begin to name and call and honor that little one, whether she or he is here or on the way. And at the end of the day, we always call it love because that's what we're bringing into our family and hope for the future and dreams. And this book and the poem, which my stories always start with a poem, really celebrates all of that unknown and the playfulness of that. So this book is really playful. It's interactive because it has a mirror at the end where the baby is now introduced to itself and the idea of just loving itself and that we're loving baby. So it's really playful in that way. There's tons of little names, like our little deer, our little pumpkin, our little love bug, our chickadee, our little stinker. So it begins to really talk about all the characteristics that your baby may or may not have in the most playful, fun way. So when the baby is read to, it begins to see, all the ways that we've expected the baby to come and just couldn't wait because we're so excited about it.
Sandra, you've been writing for over 25 years. You are the mother of an adult daughter, and now you are welcoming a granddaughter into the family. Hello Baby is probably a really amazing entry point for new parents and a gift for expectant parents. Now, with your own daughter having her first child on the way, and with a lot of people that are probably going to see Hello Baby on the shelves and pick it up for someone who's expecting, what sort of message do you hope readers expecting children are able to glean from this in a time where they are under a lot of stress and uncertainty of dealing with welcoming a new child into the world?
Sure. Well, that is so true. That is a great question. And certainly it is a time of uncertainty and, there's a suspended kind of anticipation that is part of the whole thing. But I think what overrides all of that always when there's conflict in life is finding the joy, finding that space where we're present and we are living in the joy that is we're experiencing now and the joy that is to come. And I think there's a playfulness in this story that is about anticipation, but also welcoming. Like the first line of the book is, "Hello, baby. We're so happy that you're here." So it's really about the baby's here or the baby's not here. It's about recognizing that we all have this sense of joy about the expectation of bringing another human being into this world. And on the title of the book, Hello Baby, it says, we're buzzing because you're here. And I think that buzzing, it's a bee on the cover, of course, but the buzzing really is how we all feel. There's a mix of all kinds of big emotions and big feelings. But I think kind of drilling down, I think to the joy of it is what this book does and the playfulness of it. And that was my hope. That's my intention. That's where I'm living in these days, with the anticipation of the future and, a future human being, that we can love and, that will be here before we know it.
Sometimes people often think of the first few months of a child's life as a time where it's almost like you're on autopilot. You're just kind of you're losing out on sleep. You're dealing with changing diapers, feeding time, nap time, a difficult schedule to adjust to. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of making sure to share in the moments of specifically reading to a young child, even if they are at a time before they're even developing memories, for a book like Hello Baby?
Yeah, we know, there's the science is clear that the first 3 years of a baby's life, the brain is developing at a speed and a dimension that it will never ever develop that quickly or that fully. So we know the more engagement, the more interaction, the more touching, hugging, kissing, singing, engaging in reading, all of that does nothing other than help build your baby to become all that it's meant to be. It's connecting. It's bonding. And these simple acts of love do that. We don't need, to read a lot of books, how to do it. It's every day in every way that we engage in the life of that child. And there will be stressful moments. There'll be moments when the baby won't stop crying, where the diaper goes awry. All of those things will happen. That's just the nature of having little ones and caring for little ones and caregiving in general. But the joy that comes around the skills that you develop as the caregiver and that the baby begins to respond to it are enormous. And those caring acts of kindness and love and soothing teaches that child to be able to self-soothe themselves at some point, to be able to calm down and be able to rock itself to sleep at some point. So we're teaching all along as we are learning our own skills and helping that baby grow. So staying in the moment is everything for babies, raising babies, but I think for life, life can be very complicated. There's a lot going on. There's a lot being, thrown at every person every day, all the time. And when we can settle our spirit, we can settle our life force into being in the moment, I think we can fully appreciate where we are, who we're with, what we're feeling, and what matters most to us. And that practice is a practice. It's a discipline. Not easy to do all the time. But when we can do that for ourselves and teach our families to do that, I think it really offers us, those moments of life where the magic lives, where calmness lives, where life is. We're with the people we love in that moment. And I think that's, an important practice and one that people will value.
Now, you brought up teaching self-care for an infant, that as you are engaged as a parent or as a guardian, that the child will pick up on certain routines and be able to sort of take care of itself in small ways. A lot of times developmentally, it looks like as a child is growing, they are becoming more autonomous and more independent. But I think that's something that is really important not to forget, is to make sure that you are sharing that you are sharing your feelings and your love for that child. After a child outgrows a book like Hello Baby and some of your other works, what are some ways that a parent can make sure that their child feels seen and loved?
Well, there's so many ways. In as you're talking about autonomy, when a child begins to crawl, when a child begins to walk, that sense of agency and being able to explore, encouraging that in safe ways and safe environments, of course, gives that child the agency that they can do those things. feeding themselves. I mean, initially, we're either breastfeeding or bottle feeding a baby, but when they move closer to being able to eat smaller things, you begin to see that they can pick up a pea, they can put that in their mouth, they can, begin to fool with the spoon. And in the encouragement and the appreciation of those efforts are really what every human being needs, like to do their next step. I mean, it really just is acknowledging and encouraging, in all ways, and I think, the other thing that I think we miss out on is we don't succeed at first at almost anything. We have to learn, and you make mistakes and you stumble, and saying that's okay too. When, a glass of milk or a bottle of milk or something like that is spilled on the floor, it's not the end of the world. We learn that that's how we learn that milk is liquid, that it falls, that it spills. We clean it up together. I mean, I think it's just a matter of just, moving with the child's energy and the child's ability to be curious and continue to grow, but realizing that we're not all going to do these things, right beginning. They're right. It's not right or wrong. That's what's beautiful, and it's in the learning. It's the process. So, just being engaged in that process, I think, is really important.
You said that we're not all good at those things at the very beginning, and I think that when it comes to new parents, there's that uncertainty, as we talked about earlier, the sort of fear of getting things wrong. But it sounds a lot like one of the things that you're really hammering in here is simply being present in a child's life. Just sort of kind of being there, being engaging and interacting. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of raising a child and maybe pushing back against those very natural fears of getting things wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in a society where there's right or wrong and good and bad, and there's all these polarities, these contrasts. I'm looking more at creating an environment where we're not in those spaces. We're in, doing things differently, doing things our own way, doing things that feel, meaningful to us. One of my favorite words, and I'm working, on creating a poem around this. I love the word, uh-oh, so if a baby drops something or a child drops something or if I drop something, it's like, uh-oh, it's not the end of the world. It's like a song. It's like, uh-oh, is just a place to learn from. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's not, oh my, it's not, that's terrible. It's not the end of the world. It's, uh-oh, we move on. We keep going. Not everything is meant to be perfect and, designed in a way that we don't have, we don't trip. We don't have mistakes. We don't, the mistakes and the tripping and all of that and getting lost. Those are the things in life where I think we grow. Like a long time ago, I read a quote, like, if there was no conflict, no one would change. Why would you move? Everything was so perfect. Why would you do anything different? The idea that there's some little hiccup that allows us to explore and grow and change is kind of exciting. And the idea of making that bad or not good or wrong, there's really no upside to that. Making it an opportunity for growth is where I think what's interesting and what makes these relationships between people more interesting, because they can be mended, they can be healed, you can move on. It's not the end of the world. It's just, a hiccup. That's it.
Sandra, you mentioned this poem that you're working on about the phrase, uh-oh. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your creative process? Is uh-oh going to be a book on its own someday, or is this something that you're just kind of doing in your free time? And if so, if not, how, and if it is something you're just doing in your free time, how exactly do you find yourself working something into becoming a book that you'll eventually publish?
Yeah. That's a great question. And creativity is not a straight answer. I mean, I write every day. I write, a journal, to sort of process my day, to process and to document things that I want to make sure I don't forget that are part of my life. But I write poetry almost every day based on some idea, some person, some concept that comes into my world that I'm interested in exploring. And, the uh-oh, My daughter has a friend who has a child, a little boy, and we were Zooming with them, and he kept dropping things, and he'd go, "Uh-oh," like it was no big deal. I'm like, "Oh my God, uh-oh is such a great phrase." And because it didn't matter that he dropped his toy, it didn't matter that the milk spilled on the table. It was uh-oh, and I thought that is such a great message for me personally, just not the end of the world, whatever the little mistake was. But also for kids and families everywhere to make that a fun thing, like make when a child maybe thinks he made a mistake or did something that might be, you know, frowned upon, to turn that into a learning experience and something that's fun. So I've just begun noodling around with that. Will it become a book? Maybe. I don't necessarily, I don't write poems every day saying this is going to be a book. I write things about what is coming into my life, something that I find that I want to explore and, create. And then later down the road, when I'm thinking about what might be the next, project, what might be in addition to what I've done that might carry on something that I'm trying to do, in my literary works, then I may pull from this library that I have, that's in all different places. Sometimes I handwrite, sometimes I draw, sometimes it's on my computer, but I have a world of where I'm creating, that I draw from. Recently, I've been drawing from ideas, that I'm confabulating stories from my own childhood, beginning to share some of those, things of lessons that I learned that were important for me and then putting part of that together with something that I've learned as an adult that I want to share. So creativity isn't a straight line. It comes from different places. I almost feel, and I've described this many times over the years, that ideas come like clouds, like pieces of ideas. I'm constantly like picking at clouds, and eventually they come together and they begin to organize in some way, that only I can organize them. Other people might pick similar themes and ideas, but when they organize it into their spirit, into their creative process, they organize it differently than I do. And, before I know it, I'm beginning to put all these seemingly unrelated things together in an organized system that only I develop, that I can then say, this is how I want to share this. And that's how my creative process works. I want to share this, whether it's a book, whether it's an object, whether it's a painting, then I figure out how I'm going to organize those themes. Talking about creativity is an interesting thing because people approach it so differently, and how they describe it. It's hard to put words to something that is really process driven. But I think it's really fascinating. I love talking about it. Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love long time ago, did this talk on TED Talk where after she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, she sold millions and millions of copies, was translated in every language. She was stuck. She's like, I don't know what to do anymore. How did I even create that? I had no idea how I created something so universal. Wasn't conscious. So she did a talk on TED Talk about where creativity comes from. And I think that's an interesting idea. It's another theory for her and for us to look at, like, what is creativity? Where did it come from? What is the history of it? And I think I ponder that. I wonder about that. My husband's an artist. He's a painter. He works in a very different way. My daughter's an artist. She works in a very different way than I work. I know a lot of writers. We all work in our own way with the expressed, I think, shared finale, which is to share who we are, is to share our stories in the world in some way. And I think that's the goal. And we also know now, science is very clear. Neuroart science has shown us that that the brain loves creativity. The brain and our bodies are healed by certain creative actions and movements. I knew that as an art therapist. Dance therapists know it, music therapists know it, but now neuroscientists are studying the brain as it relates to the arts and how the arts heal our brain and our bodies. So there's something pretty magical going on there.
And now it's really wonderful to hear you talk about creativity because it is such a fascinating and personal thing. to everybody. And the last time we spoke, I ended our conversation by asking how you see yourself and the work that you do as an artist. It's a question that I ask every guest on this podcast. And I have here some of the summary of your response, which was that you hope that your work shares love at its core and that it is for one person to give to another, and a gentle reminder that it is simple and easy to acknowledge another human being and to show that you care. In the time since we spoke, and with the release of several books in the last year, are you seeing responses from parents who pick up your books? And are you seeing in the work that you do that you are reflecting this mission in the work that you put out?
Yes. I get emails from folks or texts through Instagram from folks who are reading books, and reviews and things like that. And I think that, yes, I mean, I'm trying to think of like there's something happened. I was like, wow, it does come around. You do hear from people in a way. Try to remember this. Let me let my brain think about that. Cause yeah, absolutely. We were with friends last night. We went over to their house and their little boy came running down the steps with his father, said, "That's the woman who wrote Kiss, Kiss, Little Fish." He came down with his book and he's kissing the fish all the way through. So, that was really remarkable. I love that. You just never know how the work goes out in the world and touches people's lives. That is always the sort of magic in this. I've been at book signings where, I'm reading books to children and I see a woman crying in a corner and later she comes over and she said, "When I was 11 years old, my mother gave me a painting that you did. And I had no confidence at 11. It was like, be yourself was the painting. It was a picture of a woman with a bee on her head. And she said, I have held that my whole life." And she rolled up her sleeve on her arm and there was my bee tattooed to her arm. And she said, "I didn't know you were going to be here today. I was next door shopping. And I don't even think I remembered your name as a child, but I remembered your bee and that message. And I found myself here and you're reading." And she's like, "That's her." And so she waited to talk to me and show me the bee that she kept on her arm her whole life. She kept that bee with her. And as an adult, she put it on her arm to remember to believe in herself.
That's beautiful, Sandra. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Thank you. And, I'm delighted always to speak with you. Your questions are so important and so thoughtful. I just want to welcome all these new babies coming into the world and send lots of love to the parents and the grandparents and especially to those little ones, the newest members of the human race. We need them more than ever. And I'm looking forward to help sharing love with all of them. So thank you for allowing me to do that.
Thank you. That was an interview with Sandra Magsamen. Her newest book, Hello Baby, is available now. You can learn more about Sandra and her work at sandramagsamen.com. If you appreciate the work being done on this show, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, or follow wherever you are currently listening to help push the show out to new listeners. Second, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at BookFairPod. Lastly, you can follow the show on Patreon at patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is free, and there are no posts hidden behind a paywall. Of course, the best way to help the Book Fair podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.